This conference,
Oh, it's going
this
to be recorded.
conference will now be recorded.
I see Rick, okay. See Ann came on. So I've got Dan, Chris Mayer, Rick, Ann, myself, William. Is there anybody else I'm missing?
Lisa Mike Nelson should be here.
Okay.
She's on the call.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good. Okay.
Morning, Lisa.
I guess the
Good morning.
purpose of this call is to, I guess, address the question or issue relative to assessing civil penalties. And I think in the last dealer board meeting, it came up in reference to assessing civil penalties for unlicensed salespeople, I think is what actually was the point of discussion. Is that how, William, you understand it and everybody else on the call understands it?
That's correct.
Okay. So is it just the issue of salespeople, or is it the issue of assessing civil penalties whenever we have a multiplier like salespeople, dealer tags, whatever? How do we kind of view the issue?
The issue was specifically dealing with unlicensed salespeople. Not to say that we can't take this philosophy and apply to other areas, but that was the main thing.
Okay. Okay. Dan, I think you potentially commented the most on it, and I think that's when the commissioner mentioned that he wanted us to take a look at it. Did you want to start with kind of giving your thoughts on this topic?
Well, I mean, I think that we just need to come up with a a baseline. I think I just saw Maurice. I read the most recent copy of the newsletter, and Maurice Slaughter got hit with 5,700. So I don't know what happened with that, but you know, I mean, I don't have any specific suggestions on what to do, but you know, I think that we need to kind of have a baseline of what the fine should be, and I don't know. I mean, I think that the whole thing that prompted this was what happened with the Hall Automotive with Bill Baker when they got hit with that 90,000 or whatever, and then it dropped it down to 1,000 eventually. And just with I don't know. I mean, I think that we're kind of going overboard with a little bit of it, and especially when there's no intended fraud or not following the rules.
Right. So the philosophy we've had on civil penalties is remember that the numbers and multipliers are in fact the guidelines of the hearing officer, and based on a lot of criteria, the hearing officer then assesses those civil penalties, and then we take a look at it. And one thing kind of off to the side is I mentioned to William is what I think we should do in orientation to new board members is give them some criteria to look at how we assess civil penalties, which is another topic. But you have the issue when you have a salesperson and you have a multiplier like number of deliveries that salesperson can do, that in fact those fines can go very high. Are we thinking we want to have a cap, or are we thinking some other thoughts relative to how we assess them?
Well, I think from the Hall one, it was that a finance person wasn't licensed. And I don't think we need to get into this, but does a finance person really need to be licensed to sell cars? Maybe, I guess, but they did deal with a licensed salesperson. So I don't know. I'm open. I don't know if anybody's had any deep thought on this, but
I mean, typically the finance person deals with the entire closing. They'll receive docs from the folks at the counter in the front, and then they sit in the office and either upsell them on back end items or not. I definitely think there's a big difference between willful disregard to the code and trying to slide somebody through, and somebody who makes a mistake like the Hall group did. Or even I'll refer back to Jeff's situation at Malloy Toyota, where it slipped between the cracks. I don't think it was a willful disregard. So I think we need to think about a willful disregard versus somewhere it slips between the cracks.
Right.
Can I offer my comment on this whole thing? So we have I guess, where we're coming from at the staff level. We just try to apply, I guess, the rules across the board. When we uncover or we find things or it comes to us, we look at it, we ask questions, we ask for paperwork, and we go from there. And as Mr. Bannister said earlier, it depends on what's uncovered. So the general rule is, and this is by board policy, is that it's $250 per vehicle for unlicensed salesperson for each vehicle they sell. That's the general rule. Of course, franchise dealers, because you sell a lot more cars, that $250 can get into the 90s and 100,000s very quickly. But we also have a process. Because of that process, we would say, okay, if a licensed person is now involved in the process, we go from $250 down to $50 per vehicle, which I think is fair, because there's a licensed person involved in the process. Now, the question about, finance people and all those people being, having to require a license, that's a requirement. That's what the board has put in place, and that's what we go by. We don't sit back and pick and choose who we're going to bring forth. We bring to the board, we've done our job. Well, let's go back to the beginning. We identified, we go to the individual who we're assessing. They have the option of paying the civil penalty or the option or appealing it. If they appeal it, they go before a hearing officer, who in turn now has seen what we found, reviews what we found with the person. Here's the person's story, and the hearing officer has the ability at that point to make a recommendation to the board based off of their hearing, their research, and what we provided to them and what they've gotten from the dealer. And then it comes to you, the board, to make a decision. At that point, a lot of work has gone into it, but we as a staff do not have heartburn on any side. If the civil penalty that we have assessed sticks, we're fine with it. If it doesn't stick and you guys lower it, we're fine with that as well. My whole thing simply is that we're not going to be at the staff level picking and choosing who goes to the board. We're going to take the rules as they are, as the board has given us permission to do, or as the code requires us to do, and we're going to apply it, and the process will play out what happens. Yes, Mr. Slaughter did have a civil penalty of $5,000 because he had an unlicensed salesperson at the time doing sales. Mr. Malloy had the same thing. And in each of those cases, I talked to both of them and told them what they were up against, encouraged both of them to do what was best, but also reminded them that if they, as board members, came before the board and the board knocked it down, that the appearance might be detrimental to the board as a whole. But it was their call to do what they wanted to do. I didn't have a problem either way. But like any board member, I would give you a heads up first so you know what you're dealing with. And that was it. And they both chose not to go before the board for whatever reason, and that was fine. So the last board meeting, we had 2 dealerships come before the board with the same issue. One of them had one for a few unlicensed sales, and the Hall group had one that had a lot more. And so the more cars you sell in that process, the bigger the fine is going to be. That's why it's such a range. Again, we're just doing what we're doing across the board so that I can tell people, whether you're a franchise or independent or whatever, we're going to treat everybody the same. When we uncover things, we're going to go through our processes. You have a right to appeal it and what you want to do, and that's the case, and it ends up before the board. So.
Right. And the only option on something like this would be whether or not you applied it based on the number of sales or the number of months or weeks or whatever you did, a time frame versus number of deliveries.
Correct.
And Dan, that's probably one of the options if we wanted to look at it. But it's really kind of up to you guys as to how you feel. I will tell you, when I look at all these and sitting on the board now for 8 years, I look at the other circumstances that go behind each of these. Like, did they pay attention to their own self-audit? When did they do it? Why didn't they pick it up during their self-audit? Have they had any other violations or history? Any warnings? Is there any threat to the consumer based on what they did? Either consumer safety or overall intent. Was there intent of fraud or anything else in what occurs? So I use a lot of different criteria when I look at each of these. I don't have an issue with the way it's structured right now. I know why it came about. It came about so the severity of some of these things, like unlicensed salespeople, the reason that fine is so high is because if in fact it's 5 sales or 50 sales, it's still a big impact to have an unlicensed salesperson on the floor. And that's why I'm saying maybe there's an option if you wanted to look at it at months, or per month the salesperson's out there selling cars. But outside of that, I mean, these fines are really designed just like the hefty fines around insurance and dealer plates and safety inspections. They're really designed to be kind of stiff to deter that type of activity. Comments?
If I could,
Well-
this is Mike Schrapp. If I could throw something out from the association standpoint, I think the real discussion here is about what authority the staff can have to resolve a matter, and also what a hearing officer should be looking at in terms of the recommendation they're going to make. Now, in this case that we talked about in the last session, it seemed there were three issues that really made a difference, which is one, there was a clear evidence of an oversight. Secondly, there was a licensed salesperson involved in every deal because it was an F&I person. And third, it appeared that because of those things, a cap was appropriate. And I just heard Mr. Cody on his views on a variety of other things that you might want to look at. But I'm just wondering is what is the goal we're trying to achieve? My thought, as somebody working for the association, was the goal we're trying to achieve is to give the staff authority to move to a cap where that will resolve the matter before having it go to the board. Similarly, it will be a starting point for hearing officers when to do that. And I had three criteria based on what appeared to be appropriate from the Hall Group case. Mr. Cody has a few others. Should we be looking at some criteria the staff can look to, or the hearing officers can look to determine whether a cap is appropriate, so that the staff has one more arrow in its quiver, which is a cap which you can offer to some dealer to avoid going to a full board consideration. And the same thing with a hearing officer making a recommendation. So that really is our view, because when it gets to the board level, when you have to have a hearing, you're going to come up with a solution, just as you did with the two cases that were before you in the last hearing, and in every case you've had before that on unlicensed salespeople. But it seems to me that that we're looking at what authority the staff can have and some guidance for the hearing officers on a starting point when certain criteria are in place.
I mean, I like that path. I think that, I think the field staff should determine whether there was a willful disregard to policy, or it was oversight. And like I think Ron said, look at the whole history, or maybe it was Chris, I can't recall. Look at the whole history. Is this a reoccurring thing, or they have a whole bunch of other things going on? If you have a good person, good dealer like a Hall Automotive or whatever, give them a little bit more leeway. And I mean, I don't know about the cap. I mean, I guess there could be, but yeah, I know that they have. With most of these cases, they've already dropped the fines down. But I think that I think that's a good way to approach it, Mike, is looking at more of the whole totality of the situation, not just that they had an infraction, and look at the, you know, if there was willful disregard, was the customer impacted, and maybe puts, you know, give them the, maybe instruct your field staff to give them a little bit more leeway on dealing with these things. So yeah, so you know, we can have less cases come before the board and more just them paying the dealers paying the fine.
What does willful disregard look like? How are we to define that? We don't define willful disregard.
I mean, that's a difficult one. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and as William was speaking about being, you know, a level playing field for his staff to make decisions, depending on the way we go, you could create a situation where, you know, it's not a level playing field for all people involved. Maybe the level playing field is when it comes to a board level and we have to sit down and look at it and say, okay, is it a hall group or is it somebody who's been molesting customers, you know, and hurting customers? So I think we have to take that into consideration.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk to hearing officers, but when it comes to staff, let's kind of split this up. When it comes to staff, I really don't see staff getting involved in that criteria. I see staff, Mike, maybe having a not to exceed number. You know, it's $250 per occurrence, maximum of $10,000. I don't know what the number is. We could clearly pick a cap, and it would be easy for staff to administer that cap. And then the hearing officer, in the case of it going forward and being appealed to the hearing officer, could then, submit or not submit, but go ahead and apply some other criteria. So I think that I personally like the cap idea if you wanted to cap some of these, so they don't get too crazy. But I think the cap's got to be high enough that it's got to get attention. And it's not simply you can write a check and move on, because I can assure you, in the example of the other dealers you just mentioned, it got attention. It got a lot of attention. Now, did we want it to go through that route? Maybe not, but we clearly wanted it to get the attention it needed, because what we have seen over the last several years is if it doesn't, we just get repeat offenders. And so I like the cap idea. If you guys want to recommend something like that, or maybe you don't like it, but I think the cap's got to be big enough that it's meaningful.
I don't know that 10 grand's enough. I'm not trying to be, malicious, but I mean, 10 grand is, for some folks, that's like $100, you know what I mean? So maybe it's got to be more than 10 grand. Maybe it's got to be 25 grand or something. I don't know.
I think you got to draw a distinction, however, between whether there's a licensed salesperson in the deal anyway. That makes a difference. And consumer injury is another one, which Mr. Cody brought up, which I think is a critical one. So all I'm suggesting is that you look at a series of factors which the staff can use to decide that they can offer a cap, or the hearing officers can recommend a cap, because if it goes before the whole board, you're going to solve that issue anyway.
Yeah, again, and William, I don't know your reaction. My reaction is to keep it black and white for staff, have a cap, and then let the hearing officer apply additional criteria if need be. And then if that doesn't work, they end up in front of the full board.
So let me,
your thoughts?
Well, let me see if I can paraphrase what you said. I guess from a staff perspective, we don't have a problem however this thing moves. We just want to know what you want done. We'll talk about like we're doing right now, and we will put it in play. So if there's a cap, and I think what Mike Sharap is getting to is that, yes, we do look at the fact, and he knows from experience that we do look at the fact if a licensed person was involved in the process. So that takes that, what would be otherwise $90,000 civil penalty down to $16,000. And Chris, you mentioned $25,000 max, so that would clearly fall within that max. But at the same time, if the dealership appeals that, the hearing officer can take that, whatever we come up with, and they can either adjust it up or down based off of what comes before them, not to exceed the cap. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Cody?
Yeah. I will respectfully disagree with Mike's comment about, there was at least one licensed salesperson. I think to have anybody unlicensed representing a product anytime in a sales transaction is a violation of law, and that's to me was not a reason to reduce this fine. In this case, one of the reasons I saw a reason to reduce the fine was he had been prior licensed to that dealership and had switched locations. So it was a matter of an administrative, kind of miss. Now, I will tell you in this case, I went and looked at whether or not they did their own self-audit, because I don't think the dealers are taking that process seriously. And if they missed it in a self-audit, I would be, a little bit tougher on this dealership. But I think a cap for staff, and then the hearing officer uses his criteria to determine what's fair, and then if that doesn't work, it goes in front of the board. I think it's fine. Is there some kind of a cap you guys want to talk about? A number, Chris? You said how much?
25,000.
25,000. Other thoughts,
Hey,
Mike?
Ron.
Yes, Ann.
Just real quickly, I think too, one of the things that we had talked about was at VADA was the idea that, some of these cases where it really truly is some sort of administrative error, that whether there was a way to create a system where there could be a civil penalty assessed that doesn't necessarily go into the per transaction amount. Because in point of fact, if you think you've gotten somebody licensed, you may not find it for a year unless you go in and check licensing every day or every month. So, if you think you've renewed somebody's license and it just hasn't happened for some reason, in this case, it was really strange. They transferred them to a dealership and then moved them back and they missed the renewal period. You may not find that for a year. And so, and so you've got a situation where it's still one mistake.
No, I understand. And in that case, there was not intent to defraud anybody or do anything else. And I think that's why we're all fine with reducing. But I don't know that, as William said, I think where we're kind of trying to agree on is at what point do we apply that criteria? Is it at staff level? Or is it at that first hearing officer?
Yeah, and that's a fair comment. That's a fair comment. We're just trying to get at those cases where if it comes to the board, it's going to get, reduced to a small penalty because it was an administrative error and it, anyway, that was, part of what we were looking at as well is that you are essentially taking the same mistake and imposing radically different penalties on dealerships based on the sales that a particular salesperson might have been involved in.
Sure. No, I don't disagree with it. It kind of falls under the criteria of what we did with, independents not being open their hours. We finally said, listen, this is enough. We're going to do one fine, then we're going to do in front of the board and blah, blah, blah. And so I think staff's just going to look for our direction. And if our direction is a cap, they'll apply it up to a cap, and then we're going to look for the hearing officer to apply additional criteria to decide the severity of the cases. Is that really what you'd like, William, as well?
I'm fine. We're fine with that.
William, can I ask you what goes with the $50 per transaction versus $250? Is it when you have a multi-transaction situation, new car store, or how do you apply that?
Well, if the salesperson, for instance, did the whole deal, and like they do it at the independent dealerships, it would have been $250 per car, period. So that's what determines it. So at the franchise dealerships, more than likely, it's going to be a licensed person involved in the process along the way someplace. But we have had a couple of occasions, though, where we found some of the sales at a franchise dealership may have involved only an unlicensed person. But we find that doing the research when we do the investigation.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
It also may be when a salesperson is in training and then that person is actually doing the sales deal, but then that manager is the one who actually is licensed.
Okay. So Are we still liking the idea of Mike's cap and whether or not you said, Chris, you said, was it 25,000 or 15,000? 25?
25, yes, sir.
Yeah. What do we think about that? Dan,
I'm good with that.
Mike, Ann? And 25,000, Mike, 25,000. What do you think?
Well, the goal, I think, here is to make a recommendation to the whole board to establish these criteria. So I think this would become a discussion point in the whole board. And I personally think 25,000 is a bit stiff on a situation like you had last time with the one that was reduced down to $1,000. But it would seem to me that you're just making recommendations anyway to the full board, and it's going to become a subject of discussion. I personally think 25,000 is too much. I don't think the part of the goal, I think, is to arm the staff with a cap at a position where a dealer will choose the cap rather than taking the matter to the board. I see a $25,000 cap as having most dealers go to the board with it rather than just accept the cap. So I'm not sure that it achieves the goal, but we're all going to be guided by everyone else, by the decision-making process that will be the entire board as this policy is hammered out.
Mike, I see your point, but also I think to a couple other points is that we want to make sure that the dealership is really hit them in the eye so they understand, hey, don't do this again. So we don't have people that reoccur in this. And again, yeah, they probably will bring it between the board if they're hit with 25. Yeah, they will. And then as we sit down as a board, and if we still see that they followed all their policies and procedures and everything's good, yeah, we may reduce it. But if they continue to do it, we will hold firm. So and the dealership obviously has the option of coming before the board to allow us to hear it. But I think if we drop it any further than that, I think that it may take the zing out of, because I think like with Hall, if it came in at a, $2,000 or $5,000, he might have just stroked a check. But, went from 90 to 16 or whatever it was. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen again. I think that's what we're trying to make happen.
Okay. So a recommendation might be, obviously, we go back and we say a cap idea, a cap concept, or in our discussions here, 25,000, is what we're thinking as a cap, and see what the full board wants to do relative to lowering or raising that number. But other than that, the formula would remain the same for staff at $250 or $50 per vehicle based on the incident.
I think there still should be some criteria, though. I mean, where it doesn't appear to have been any attempt to license the salespeople, I'm not sure the cap is the appropriate way to go. So you may want to have certain criteria for staff, other criteria for the hearing officers, and I think we've thrown out a lot of factors here today which work.
Well,
Okay.
let me ask the question then. Okay, the application process then for a person who's not necessarily a floor salesperson, but up in like a finance officer who may have been transferred from one location to another location and then returned back to the original location, and the application failed to take place to transfer. Well, first of all, if you're licensed in the same group, you can go back and forth all you want to, and that's not an issue. The issue in the whole group, I believe, was that because that took place, the license expired.
Right, that's true.
But as Ann said, I can see the difference now in the sense that, it might have gotten lost in the shuffling back and forth, and he might not realize till a year later. So, and I think, Mike, this is what you're trying to get at. So in that situation right there, if that occurs, then are we talking about putting a different cap in for that type of violation? Or because a person on the floor who's actually selling without a license, that's clearly, to me, an unlicensed salesperson is one of the most egregious things a dealership can do. Because the person on the floor selling the vehicle, he's not licensed, but yet he's representing your company and he's misleading the consumer that he is licensed, professional, in a position to do what he's doing. In fact, he or she may not be. Okay, the person in administration, for lack of better terms, is a little bit different. I can see that. So do we want to put a cap there for that type of instance versus the salesperson on the floor, or just put it out there so we're talking? Just put it all out there so when we go to the board meeting, we can give the board all they need to consider and think about, so we can get this hopefully done the first time around versus 2 or 3 times.
My intent was from more the clerical part. If somebody starts selling cars and they're not licensed and the dealership never failed to ever apply for a license, that's totally different than somebody that's been an administrative issue from my standpoint.
Okay.
I think $25,000 is a lot of money in anybody's world, whether it's Hall or a small dealership. And I think that's enough to get somebody's attention, whether it's, clerical error or whether it's a salesperson on the floor. 25 grand can have an impact.
Yeah, and I agree, Chris, but the question at hand is, would we give, William, and I think you're asking this question, would we give staff the authority in clearly just a clerical issue where this has been a licensed salesperson before for the organization? In this case, it was a purely clerical error. They thought when they moved them that they were good. They were obviously okay with that, but because they moved them, they never really checked the expiration of the license, and therefore, when they moved them back, they didn't think they had a violation. And the way we picked it up is they went to go ahead and renew the license, and it had expired. So, it was clearly just a clerical error. Do we want to give staff the option in a purely clerical transaction, as Mike was saying, to lower that cap to some other number per occurrence?
Right.
That's the question. I would be fine with that. I honestly, I think in that case, where it's, as long as, William, you're fine that the criteria is so black and white, you know what I mean? You can tell, in fact, that it's a clerical issue. I think Mike and Ann's point, well taken. I think it might be obviously to our benefit to maybe come up with some other lower number in a, clearly no one had the intent to defraud anybody or do anything else against the law. It's just in a multi-locations dealerships, it fell through the cracks. So yeah, I'd be fine with that. I think it would save some effort. But for the record, I will say this: I don't mind the volume of stuff we get at the dealer board. I don't think it's too much, quite candidly. Yeah, I do think we get a lot of the same stuff, but, and this is coming from dealer practices, which carries the bulk of the agenda. I don't think we get too much stuff necessarily. I'm not trying to eliminate it. I'm just trying to be fair and come up with a civil process that we all agree on. And I think in this case, maybe a high cap like Chris recommended, when there was, there's intent and there's, and then some kind of a lower number where there's just a clerical error. What do you all think?
Well, in my opinion, I don't think we need to have a cap on willful disregard to the policy. I mean,
How often do we get willful? I'm sorry.
Maybe I don't know. You guys have been on the board longer than me, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know the last time we had somebody that just, they're out there selling and they never registered as a salesperson, or they're a felon, or never I don't know, but I don't think that we should put a cap on somebody that's a felon. They try to get licensed, and I think we've had a couple of those over the years that I've been there, but I don't think that there's a need for a cap on that particular one. That will be one that will come from the board anyway, probably. So
we get them. I mean, there's clearly disregard for the policy, and we get them, and we do fine them and find them. and then end up finding them. But I will tell you, in most cases, and please don't take this wrong, it's the smaller dealerships, and the fines never get that large anyway. I mean, they get large, but not in the magnitude of the Hall case, quite candidly.
So is there a need to put a cap on that then? I don't think so. I think we just let the cards fall where they may.
And
That's
also,
my
let me
opinion, but I guess we can put it in front of the board, but that's,
let me
I
add
think
to Ron's
the
point
time
that a
I'm
lot
sorry.
of those dealerships, no, I'm sorry. A lot of those dealerships that get those fines, they end up paying them rather than come for the board. So, and
Yeah,
they
'cause
are
the
usually the
volume-
smaller dealerships.
The volume's not as large and the number's
Right.
not as big, and therefore it kind of fixes itself. So, Dan, really the cap's going to apply for the most part to franchise dealers or high volume independents, and therefore it's only going to apply in very few cases. But at least it's there. I personally wouldn't be against it. Again, the bulk of the ones we've seen in the past have been $5,000 to $10,000 kind of numbers because the volume just wasn't there to support a larger number, even in the formula we currently have. But do you, Dan, I hope I answered your question. And do you guys want some kind of a lower administrative thing that can very quickly be administered? And then is that our recommendation? And save the rest of the hearing process for something that was clearly just an administrative issue? I'll give you my opinion. I'm fine with it. I think it makes sense as long as William's fine with implementing it at the staff level. I would save a lot of effort on everyone's part where there was not intent to do anything else, but they missed it. Now, William, I still go back to my point. If they had a self-assessment and they said they checked it and they turned around and got a fine after they said they checked it, I don't think that's an administrative error.
Okay. And also keep in mind, when we assess civil penalties, and the reason why you see a lot of people coming before the board for $250 is because they don't think they should pay it. So no matter what we do, you're probably going to see them anyway because they're probably going to appeal it. But at least we have the option of clarifying before they get to the board meeting.
Okay. Anybody want to throw out a number, or you just want to go to the full board and just say we recommend something less for an administrative?
I mean, I suggest we just go in front of the whole board, and see what we think, have a discussion.
Okay. So an administrative fine in those cases where there was no intent, and then a $25,000 cap in our current computation where there was intent, or no prior license, or some other thing that should have been caught. Chris, thoughts? Dan? Mike, Ann?
I'm good with that.
I'm good.
If I could just speak a moment to William's point, because I'm sympathetic to it, which is how do I know? William's point is how do I know? And I think it's a lot like a judge, William, in a summary judgment motion. In other words, when the judge, he or she can look at it and say, it's so clear to me that I can render a decision without a trial. That's how I do it. But if I have any doubt whether it is willful or administrative, then it needs to go to the jury. And in this case, the jury is the whole board, which will sit on it. So, it really isn't. It's a situation for you where it's going to be. There are those that are clear to you, and those that are not clear to you. You'll probably choose not to impose your decision-making authority there. You'll just say that's got to go to the jury, or in this case, the board, which is frankly will be the one to determine whether it is or is not meriting something higher. So I think that's the way to look at it.
Thanks. We got it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments, thoughts, anything else we need to discuss, William, or does anybody else on this committee feel like there's something else we should discuss before we go back to the full board? Okay. Yeah, I think it's pretty.
Is there another meeting set for the end of the month? I have something on my calendar.
Mike, we only put that placeholder there in case we were going to need it.
Gotcha.
Um,
Okay.
So really the intent of the end of this meeting, the willful intent here, is to determine whether or not we should have another meeting before the next board meeting. And I think you guys are going to all shake your head no, because you'll be returning your Christmas gifts. True? Dan will be in a photo session for Time Dealer of the Year guy, but
Absolutely.
be returning a gift. So I'm going to assume that there's no need to have another meeting. You guys will back me in the full board meeting with enthusiasm, and it will only be long enough for me to get another special assignment.
Oh, definitely. Now, Ron, before we close, can I add a couple things?
Yes, sir.
All right, first of all, as you've already done, on behalf of the board staff, Mr. Baxter, congratulations on your nomination for the Times Deal of the Year.
Thank you.
Being that you're one of 40 people in the entire country, that's a hell of an accomplishment in itself. So congratulations and best of luck going forward. And if you can follow up with Mr. Cody did last year, then we can probably get a new slogan for Virginia. You know, not only are we the lovers, but we have the best dealers in the country year in and year out. So
There we go.
Okay. All right.
Number two.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Number two, you guys see Richard Sipe in the picture on the call. Richard Sipe is part of the board. He's been part of the board for a while now, but he is the operations manager. So he'll be the face you'll be seeing in meetings, but he has the, well, he's fortunate. He's the one who's succeeding Peggy Bailey. So, and Rick, with his previous experience on the board and working in most of the areas within the board, he's going to do an outstanding job for us. He's off to a great start, and you should look forward to great things from him because he's that type of person. So he's your point of contact. He's the person that's there, and we're not going to miss a beat in that regard. We miss Peggy, of course, but you know, time moves on, things change, and he's the right person in the spot to get it done for us right now. And I guess lastly, as Ron said, the 29th was a placeholder anticipating the possibility of a second meeting. And, you know, and I'm glad that we don't necessarily need it, but it's there in case we do need it. And I guess my last thing is for you guys, on behalf of the staff, we want to wish you guys the best of the holiday season, and may all of your sales exceed your expectations.
Thank you,
we need the money here too. So
yeah, thank you, William. And I'll assume if there's no other comments that we will not do the meeting on the 29th, and we will report back to the full board in January. Okay.
Sounds good.
Meeting then adjourned, and have a wonderful and safe holiday season.
thank you, guys.
Okay, we'll see you guys. Take care.
Same to you.